Welcome to this webinar about the future of the food industry. We have titled this session, Appetite for Disruption, Making the Most of the Future of Food. My name is Rodolfo Guzmán. I'm the managing partner for Arthur D. Little in the Americas. I'm based in Houston, Texas. We have an excellent group of panelists that I will be introducing in just 1 minute here to talk about this very interesting topic of the future of food, which is based on a study that Arthur D. Little and Presans, a company that we recently acquired, conducted recently. It's a fascinating topic, as you will see from this discussion. The food industry is undergoing very interesting changes related not only to changes in consumer patterns, but also innovation, technology, a lot of breakthroughs, digitalization, a lot of many things going on. So it's quite challenging for participants in this sector to position themselves for the future. And in this webinar, we'd like to talk a little bit about what's going on, what are the major trends, what are some of the scenarios, what are the challenges for the participants in the sector, share the insights of our panelists, and also address some of the questions you may have about these trends and what it means for the players in the sector. With that, I think we'll start the presentation and I will introduce the panelists. Yeah, so here with you today, I already said I'm Rodolfo Guzmán, managing partner of the Americas. From Arthur D. Little, we also have Marten Zieris, who is a partner in our Global Strategy and Organization Competence Center based in Germany. And Phil Webster, a principal in our technology and innovation practice, and Phil is based in London. From Presans, the company that Arthur D. Little acquired recently to have extend our outreach of network of experts, we have the leader of Presans, Albert Meige, who is also an associate director at ADL and is based in Paris. And finally, our special guest today, Christophe Perthuisot, who was a senior vice president with Danone, senior vice president of global research and innovation. And he was actually heavily involved in the study that we recently conducted about the future of food. I have to say that that study, which by the way, we'll be sharing with all of you also an article that was written with the conclusions of that study, was sponsored by 3 key companies, Danone, which is one of the top food companies in the world, Bonduelle, which is one of the world's top vegetable processing companies, and SEB, which is the global leader in small domestic appliances. So fascinating insights. Most of the audience is quite familiar with Arthur D. Little, but for those of you who don't know the firm, just to say we are actually the oldest management consulting firm founded in 1886. We have more than 40 offices around the world. 6 million industry experts supporting us from many different topics, including the Presans Global Network. And we are very proud of our history, our legacy, and particularly our focus on innovation. As you can see, we cover many different industry sectors and functional sectors. Today, we're going to be talking primarily about our experience in food and agriculture, but also related to our functional focus on technology and innovation management. So this webinar have a lot of people with significant experience in the areas of technology, research, and innovation management. I will transfer it to you, Albert, to start the presentation with the key insights of our study.
Thank you so much, Rodolfo, and hi, everyone. So my name is Albert, and as Rodolfo said, I am the founder and CEO of Presans, which is an Arthur D. Little company focusing on industrial innovation. And we actually led this study on the future of food that was initiated by the 3 companies that Rodolfo mentioned before, and in particular by Christophe Perthuisot, who is with us tonight. And when Christophe first spoke about his challenges related to the future of food, he told us I have a triple challenge. There is a triple challenge when you want to deal with future of food. So in a nutshell, the first challenge is related to complexity. There is a strong complexity in the future of food because there is a kind of a double convergence. There is a convergence at the industry level because the food industry is not only a question of agri-food, it is also a question of pharma, a question of delivery, and in particular delivery on demand. It's a question of kitchen automatization, it's a question of digital platforms, etc. So there is a strong convergence at the industry level. And there is a second convergence at the technology level. If you look at 10 years ago, food was mostly concerned with nutrition, while today food is, of course, still about nutrition. But if you remain in life science, it goes all the way to more recent fields such as gene editing. It goes all the way to digital technologies, for example, blockchain for traceability, all the way to materials, and especially advanced or new materials as a substitute to plastics, especially in the context of sustainable development. So you have all these relevant technologies which are now super important, but add to the complexity of this field of future of food, that is therefore extremely complex. So the battlefield of food is a very complex area. So that's the first challenge. The second challenge is related to speed or acceleration. And one of the reasons for that is that most enabling technologies underlying the future of food, or at least more and more of these technologies, are so-called exponential technologies. Exponential technologies are technologies whose features are progressing very rapidly. If you take, for example, gene editing that I was mentioning just before, it's a technology whose features are progressing very rapidly. Namely, it was almost science fiction just a few years ago, while today it has become one of the most important technologies shaping the future of food. So that's the second challenge. It's a question of acceleration. And three, the third challenge, which is it's related to biases. As you know, we have biases at the individual level. It's everything related to cognitive biases, related to the way our brain works and can prevent us from seeing the world from different perspectives, but also biases at the collective level. What I mean by that is everything that has made the company successful and get to the point where they are now, when it comes to thinking differently, to detecting and adapting to disruption, all these things, this legacy, strategic legacy, organization legacy, etc., can get in the way to address the new world, so to speak. So when you want to build the research and innovation roadmaps, you have to map and analyze this battlefield, and it's extremely challenging because you have to map trends which can be usage trends, technological trends in materials, life science, digital, etc. So you have very different natures of trends. You have trends which are at various different maturities, from low maturity to very mature technologies. You have trends which can have various different kind of impacts on the business. And also some of these trends can be very interconnected. So really, there is a big challenge in mapping and analyzing the battlefield before being able to develop the research and innovation strategic roadmap. So this is basically the context in which Christophe contacted us. And for that, we have used a so-called scenario-based strategy or a scenario-based approach. I'm not going to go into the details of every things that we have done during this project because we don't have time, and that would maybe be boring for some of you. But basically what we did after doing the mapping and the analysis of the trends, we have built 4 prospective scenarios. And just keep in mind that we are not saying that the future is going to be one or the other of these scenarios. The future is actually going to be a combination of these scenarios, but depending on the strategic positioning of the company will lean more or less towards one of these scenarios. And in this particular project on the future of food, with our clients, we wanted to have these scenarios describing both how the value chain would be transformed if the scenario was becoming true, and how usages would transform if the scenario was becoming true. Okay, and these scenario-based approaches are extremely powerful when dealing with complexity and uncertainty. So after mapping and analyzing the trends, building the scenarios, we have identified and described what we called 7 breakthrough attributes. These attributes are features that successful companies in the future of food will have. These features are kind of at the crossroad of usage and technology. A single company will not have all 7 attributes, but depending on the scenario that they feel that they are close from, they will highlight one or several of these scenarios. For example, if the company Danone, since Christophe is with us, feels that they are close to the scenario that we have called Soylent World, which is a scenario in which consumers focus on artificial food, gene-edited food, etc., to bring to have a better health benefit, then the features 5, 6, and 7 would be the most important. For example, the number 6, the company would have to focus on leveraging gene editing. Okay, so that's the way everything is articulated. We start from the scenarios. It allows to highlight specific attributes, and then we have developed a whole dashboard linking these attributes to the technological bricks and to the capabilities that you need to develop and master these technological bricks. So that's really, in a nutshell, the overview of what we've done. And if I was asked to share 2 key takeaways that we found the most surprising in this project, I would pick the 2 following. First, digital, and 2, gene editing. So let me elaborate just a little bit on these 2 attributes. For the 3 companies that were involved in this project, they were all aware that digital technologies were super important, that they had to do their digital transformation, etc. But they did not expect this trend to be so massive, so critical, and actually so close to present. And one of the key aspects is the feature that you have here on number 1. A successful company in the future of food has to be at the heart of a digital platform connecting the upstream part of the value chain, producers, for example, with the downstream part of the value chain, for example, consumers. Once again, this was one of the most surprising findings, let's say, in terms of how close it is from a disruption. Then the second key takeaway, in my opinion, was everything related to gene editing. Because, as I said, gene editing is a field of technologies that was almost science fiction just a few years ago, but it's a field that has progressed extremely rapidly over the last few years. And the thing with gene editing is that any question that you have on the value chain of food, you can address it with gene editing. For example, you want to make your crops more resistant to the environment, you have answers with gene editing. You want to bring a specific taste or texture to the food in your plate, there are answers with gene editing. You want to bring specific health benefit to the consumers, you have answers thanks to the gene editing. And especially due to the fact that there is a better and better knowledge of the mechanisms, for example, aging mechanisms of the body, and you can target specific mechanisms with the food. So these are really the 2 main takeaways that I would like to share. And now I'm going to hand over to Rodolfo, I suppose, our master of ceremony.
Thank you, Albert, for those interesting insights and a good summary of the story. As I mentioned earlier, there is a very nicely written article as well in our Prism, latest Prism edition, our magazine, and we'll make sure that we send out copies to all the attendees that have registered to this webinar. Also, I'd like to remind the participants that you can use the Q&A mode in Zoom to submit your questions. At the end, we'll have an opportunity to discuss those questions with our panelists. In the next part of this webinar, I'd like to invite Martin and Phil to share the views about what the future of food means for how to innovate, which is a quite interesting topic and is an area where Arthur D. Little has been doing quite a bit of work with some of our clients and trying to understand how to position for the breakthroughs in this sector.
Thanks, Rodolfo. Phil Webster here. Thanks also, Albert, for queuing us up nicely. And so far, we've reflected on what needs to be done in the food and beverage sector. There's now the question of how to do this in research and innovation. And as Albert said, today we're operating in a food and beverage sector battlefield, which is becoming more complex, where there's a need to work more quickly, a need to master new technologies, but still at the core of it, there's a need to maintain what a food and beverage company needs to do in terms of driving consumer delight, improving convenience, and to enable more localized and personalized products through more effective branding and through the use of new ingredients and recipes and so forth, through some of the drivers we've got down on the left-hand side of this page. There's also the need to ensure an underpinning non-negotiable, if you like, of supplying safe and high-quality products and ensuring traceability and transparency to build consumer confidence in brands and to ensure consumer safety. And this requires new ways of working and new ways of innovating to deliver some of the breakthrough attributes that Albert was describing earlier on. And our view is that there are effectively 6 main imperatives to enable this. The first one being both consumer and planet-led. So building consumer foresight as well as insight, being more plugged into the sustainability agenda from an engagement and advocacy perspective. As an example, some of our food and beverage clients in the Southeast Asia are actively engaging with governments to help set up supply chains in recycled packaging where there's a need for industry to take a lead, for example. And this approach could also be very relevant in Latin America as well. New business models. So this is about creating new channels such as direct to consumer, new consumer experiences to improve consumer convenience and delight. And this in turn requires new ways of thinking and new ways of working in terms of product personalization, new means of in-store delivery, and the implications of this for quality and food safety and valuing what the scale of a future product might be. Getting to market faster. So an awful lot of organizations at the moment are looking to move away from classical roadmaps and waterfall approaches and towards greater agility and iteration, involving the consumer and other stakeholders earlier in the process. And we've seen 2 ways to deploy this. One is an overall big bang approach, in the way in which you completely repurpose the R&D process all in one go. The other, in organizations like Nestle, Unilever and PepsiCo, has been where agile or sprint-based approaches have been rolled out progressively as pilots in certain parts of the organization. So PepsiCo are using a test and learn approach in new markets to place smaller bets and quickly recognize where to start, stop and pivot, particularly in Latin America. Nestle are doing the same with some of their breakthrough areas in terms of bringing marketing together with culinary, sales and sensory in specific pilots to get things to market more quickly. Value chain and cost reduction, in our view, that's around largely the introduction of Industry 4.0 in factories and in the supply chain to improve efficiency, to make data more available, to help track predictive leading indicators of issues that might exist in the supply chain and reduce the number of quality escapes in the future. And all of this is enabled by digitalization of all aspects of food and beverage. Arguably, food and beverage has lagged behind other industries such as automotive in digitalization and in automation. And it's where there's potential for creating data lakes, which enable data engineering, more robust decision making, and making use of new tools and technologies in sensors and devices. So, for example, what would happen if you could automatically track the microbiome of a factory in real time to detect potential salmonella outbreaks before they happen? What if you could run a dark factory with only one technician with the remainder of it automated? And what if you could use artificial intelligence tools to assess the social media sentiment of your competitors and use it to predict quality and food safety issues in your own supply chains? And those are some of the big questions that the leaders in food and beverage are asking themselves. And then finally, focusing on new breakthroughs across all of these areas, both in product innovation, in processing innovation, and in coming up with new business models to create new growth, as well as underpinning incremental renovation. And this is where being ambidextrous in terms of being able to cover both new breakthrough products whilst maintaining the core is also critical. I don't know, Martin, would you like to add anything?
I think it's just highlighting what you just said. I think the ambidextrous setup is really key in order to ensure future-proof R&D. And I think what's special about it, it requires balancing the productivity levers with the creativity levers. And I think this balancing is really key to success, and it's company specific. So it really depends on, of course, your priorities. It depends on capabilities, but it also depends on your corporate culture. We will touch on this in the next section. So yeah, looking forward to this discussion. It's really key.
Thank you, Phil and Martin. We're ready to launch our first poll to the audience. Clearly, from what Phil was explaining, no matter what region or market you're based on or competing, innovation is the name of the game. And if you want to be relevant and successful in the food industry, clearly the innovation imperative is something that you need to address. We'd like to ask you, all the participants, and today we have people from Latin America, but also Europe and the US connected to this webinar. In your view, what is the most pressing area where innovation is required? And we'll give you a list, many of options very similar to what Phil just described. Please choose just one. For those of you that are outside Latin America, just think about your region or market, but choose one option here to see where do you believe the trends are more relevant and innovation may be more important. Is it in the consumer led topics? Is it in getting your products faster to market? Is it developing new business models? Is it the value chain and reducing costs? Is it the leverage of digital technologies? Or is it coming out with new breakthroughs? What do you think is the most relevant for your market? We'll give you 30 seconds and then we'll show quickly the results of the poll before we continue. Okay, quite interesting. I guess quite divided here. Majority of votes go to digital technologies, but at least 5 of the 6 options got at least 1 vote, which means that this may be quite dependent on the market that you're playing. But we do believe that all of these are relevant. And in the next section of the presentation, we're going to be talking in depth about some of these areas in more detail. So we can continue. I guess it's you now, Martin.
I'll add a few points first, but in a way, I was quite pleased to see the results of that poll, because the one that came out marginally ahead was actually the point around digital technologies, which effectively, in our view, is one of the key underpinning requirements in the way that research and innovation takes place in the future. So our view on the topic is that you need to have been able to, rather than relying on kind of monolithic systems, if you like, a data lake, a digitally savvy workforce with the right future capabilities and the tools and systems to enable data engineering are some of the key components of what a digitally enabled, I suppose what we would call the research laboratory of the future might look like. And to us, there are kind of three elements of this. One is the greater use of off-the-shelf software that anyone can use, so what we would call software democratization, so low code or no code systems which are tailored to the needs of a particular situation rather than the people being driven by the system. And that in a way would be the perfect outcome. It's rarely perfect in those cases. Most food and beverage companies are on a journey towards this sort of future situation. The second is around making better use of digital tools to accelerate knowledge capture and learning. So that's about connecting those who have substantial amounts of information but don't use formal systems with those who are actively seeking it. And as well as that, it's about making less structured or less accessible information available in more meaningful ways, and then finding the right kind of triggers, the right user experiences, and then the right technologies to make all this work together in practice. And the third point, as Martin was talking about, was a little bit on the sort of ambidexterity of being able to balance longer range breakthrough innovation with more near-term incremental product renovation. Martin, do you want to add something about that?
Yeah, just referring to the results as well, I think it's we see ambidexterity in those results as well. If you look at, it says it highlights faster to market requirements and new business model requirements. At the same time, it focuses on value chain and cost down measures. And I think digital is the key enabler for both sides of ambidexterity, the productivity as well as the creativity part. So in other words, it's really about the question, what efforts do you spend on maintaining and developing the core, in the most efficient way, and then at the same time growing adjacencies, growing new business, most likely in the most effective way. And you highlighted it. One of the key examples is about tracking your portfolio, tracking your Horizon 1 to Horizon 3 portfolio, and tracking it according to different priorities and also different KPIs. In the short term, you might look at returns, risks, and exact timings. And in the mid and long term, you might look at growth rates or even at breakthrough potential or at the new business model implications.
Back to Rodolfo, I think. Other than just to say, if we just flip onto the next page, as Rodolfo mentioned right at the start, there is a fair amount of information behind some of the observations we're making. And we'd be more than happy to share some of the materials that we've put together on this, including in the middle there, Albert's main report, which is the full basis for our views on what the future looks like. Some thinking on what the laboratory of the future looks like, which was the basis for what Martin and I just spoke about. And a piece we've just put together on the way in which you can use artificial intelligence in order to make augmented decisions in food and beverage and in R&D.
Thank you, Phil. So we're gonna move now to the discussion part of the panel. And the idea here is, and we have the honor today to have Christophe Perthuisot among our panelists. He's the former Senior Vice President of Global Research and Innovation at Danone, with significant experience in addressing the type of issues and topics that we just discussed in the presentation, and looking at how a global company like Danone can become more innovative. So another reminder to the audience, by the way, please use the Q&A module in Zoom to send your questions. We have some topics that we'll address first, and then we'll go to specific questions from the audience. And the first topic, and Christophe, you can go first on this one, and then the other panelists may add on. Is about the agile approaches, and particularly when you are a very large global corporation like Danone, where you used to work. How can you really use agile approaches to successfully deploy innovation in this industry? What are the challenges? What can be done to really become agile in the research and development activities?
Yeah, well, thanks, Rodolfo, for the question, and thanks for you guys, Phil, Martin, and Albert, for the great introduction and the data. I guess the point I'm going to make around agile innovation methodology, but also open innovation. So I think new ways of doing innovation, basically. And my advice when you're trying to bring this into an organization which has its own ways of doing innovation is to try through piloting things, right? If you try to bring a completely new approach from scratch by sort of hoping to convert everybody on a large scale, it's often difficult, right? So I would start by piloting things at a small scale, but with in mind an element of critical mass, right? So rather than having maybe one or two people in various teams that are trying this out, I think it's better to try it with one team where everybody is using the same methodology, right? Because you get a better traction on the pilot. So I would try that first. And I guess what you have to keep in mind when you're deploying these things is you will need some quick wins. So in selecting where you start these kind of things and which technology you may look at, which startup you may be wanting to connect to, you might want to have a portfolio of projects that are going to come to fruition at different moments, right? Some may be longer term, but some needs to be short term. That's the first thing. So you have to have some quick wins. And you have to know that you're going to play the long game, right? I remember a few years ago when I was talking to some experts on open innovation. I asked them, how come the big tech companies in the West Coast in the US are so good at it? What have they done to do that? And they said that they've been at it for 25 years. And there is an element of spending the time that is necessary in all of these things. So you can pilot, try things, and adjust over time. So I guess this is my view on how you can bring these new methodologies into a big organization.
Great, thank you, Christophe. Any of the other panelists may want to add to this topic of agile approaches?
I was basically just going to agree and say that where we've seen it work successfully is once you've got a core team that's working in whatever part of the business is relevant. But once that's been established, you can then deploy that across other parts of the organization as well, rather than trying to do a scattergun approach where nothing gets done in a coordinated manner. So just to agree more than anything else. Martin?
Yeah, and you need to ensure like a safe environment of those pilots because those pilots are still part of the traditional organization, and at the borders there will be touch points with the traditional organizations, and usually those create irritation. So that's something you need to be aware as the from an overall organizational perspective, but it's important to work on those interfaces as well, because they will allow then afterwards scaling up pilots. So what Christophe just mentioned, it's important also to think ahead, starting small, but then also having in mind how to scale and what kind of roadblocks need to be managed in order to do that.
Thank you, Martin. Maybe we move to the next topic, and it's related to the topic that was chosen in the poll as one of the most relevant for most of the participants, at least in this webinar, which is the topic of digitalization in research and development. And Christophe, the question for you, also coming from a global player in this industry, where are the biggest opportunities in the digitalization of research and development, and where can you get the biggest impact?
Well, that's a good question. I suspect we could write several books around this topic, but maybe I can categorize them in several buckets, if we can say so. I guess there is one element for me where the capabilities of data analytics and artificial intelligence really allow you to de-average the innovation process and the consumer journey, if you want. So you get a much higher level of granularity on how the consumer is behaving with your product from the moment he sees it on shelf or on screen nowadays, the behaviors when he's using or interfacing with the product and recycling. And with this with data analytics nowadays, you can get that at much larger scale. You can combine together different type of data. So you can basically do real-time and, more importantly, real-life consumer understanding, right? And so that will provide a number of new insights, I think, that are essential in delivering and designing the new innovation for consumers on one hand. You can get, very strong data also from the entire product development chain, from your lab, from the factory, which I think is essential. So that data analytics is the first pocket of excellence and new information and new insight, I think, in R&D. Then the second one for me is actually digitalizing core activities. And in innovation and R&D, it's product development, essentially, right? So we will see more and more part of the product development being done on computers, essentially as a way to manage the increased complexity that Albert was mentioning earlier, right? So you get much more demand today on product development. And if you keep doing it the way we did it 20 years ago, you're just not going to be able to innovate. So you need systems that allow you to do much more iteration of your product to try and keep innovating. Typically in Danone, we, over the last 10 years when I was there, we transferred pretty much the entire packaging development to computers. And when it used to take us 6 months from a design or sketch on a piece of paper from the marketing all the way to a bottle that was tested in, say, Mexico, in pallets on the truck, it took us 3 days after this journey of time. So you can see how you can save immense amount of money and time, and that allows a lot more iteration. Now, that was packaging. There's also a lot of things you can do on process development with digital twins of your reactors, of your supply chain. There's still a lot to do, and a little bit the holy grail in the food industry is around formulation using computers. And how much of that you can get done will depend on how good we are at evaluating taste and preference from consumers, also in silico. And finally, the third point, and it's a topic I think that many heads of functions will have. When you're managing a very large organization, you often see somebody having a problem somewhere in the organization, and the answer to that problem lies somewhere else in your organization, right? But the knowledge management system that's required to connect the two is not necessarily existing. So one of the big enabler for performance in function in companies will be systems that will allow knowledge management to become a lot easier, a lot more transparent, and a lot more accessible to the entire organization. And today, there's also some development that exists in this area, which can take, the papers of a scientist and extract key theories or key rules out of it. And I suspect you could do that by looking at the formulation cards in any company, and maybe derive some basic understanding of how you formulate without being a formulator. So, these three pockets, I think, are going to see some extraordinary changes over the next few years when systems and tools are actually accelerating.
Thank you, Christophe. Very, very interesting, your thoughts about the data analytics and the use of computer power for formulation of new products and the issue of knowledge management, which is also quite relevant. And any additional thoughts from our panelists?
I was just going to add one point about the way in which digital can enable test and learn closer to markets. And that is the way in which digital tools can be used to enable the generation of rapid feedback from consumers. I think we'll probably come on to that in a second, because I've noticed a few questions appearing in the chat about how to produce products that are reachable for most consumer groups in Latin America. But we'll come on to that. Anything to add, Martin or Albert?
I think just from my side, I think there's also an important dimension, which is around capabilities and also trust. Because whenever you talk about systems and also a lot of data, I think you need to enable people to trust this data and then also act accordingly, because usually they tend to do things as they're used to, and it takes quite a while to shift that mindset and to really trust in these data and these systems. So that's really important from an organizational development perspective.
Yeah, that's a very big point. I think my view is that the human challenge will be a bigger one than the technology challenge when it comes to digitalization.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. Why don't we take this question from the participants now? I think it's quite interesting. One of the key trends that was identified in the study was the use of plant-based food. However, the costs are quite significant. A region like Latin America has a GDP per capita of maybe $7,000–8,000 as compared to 70,000 in the US and similarly in Europe. So how can people afford this type of plant-based food, and how can you make it reachable to them? Any thoughts, Christophe, or maybe Albert, on this one?
I guess it's. I think we can consider plant-based as a sort of emerging technology. It's been emerging for a while now, but let's look at it this way, right? The story of technology basically tells us that over time, the improvement in the technology makes the cost less and less of an issue, right? So my thinking is that over time, different ways of producing plant-based product will emerge. I suspect biotechnologies, for example, might bring some interesting new approach or new possibilities that will make it possible to get more affordable products. And at the end of the day, it's also when you're looking at this product, you need to make sure that you have a really strong understanding of the user, of the consumer expectations and what's important to them, to make sure that you deliver the product that is designed just right. And that's also another way where formulation in silico could help.
Thank you, Christophe. Albert or Phil, Martin, any additional comments on that one?
No, I totally agree with Christophe. I think it's part of the technologies that I was mentioning before, progressing very rapidly. And if you look at the cost, generally, it's also decreasing very rapidly.
Okay.
Yep, I'd agree with that, especially in areas like alternative proteins and so forth. Most of the impetus there is on either A, cost reduction, or B, finding ways in which to make new innovations like this aligned with what it is that consumers are looking for. And that, to me, is the big barrier, almost a bigger barrier than cost reduction. It's the whole, behavioral science side of things that is becoming an increasingly important capability.
Thank you all. Maybe let's move to the next topic here of the discussion. And one of the key areas that was identified in the Future of Food study is the increasing convergence across the value chain. And how do we see many more participants engaging with the food companies as well on the pharmaceutical side, logistic companies, even appliances and kitchen automation players are all becoming integrated into this design and delivery of new solutions for consumers. So maybe, Christophe, since I suppose for you when you were in Danone, this was a key issue, how to manage that external ecosystem of partners and alliances at a global level that can be overwhelming. How do you do that effectively? What insights could you share here with
Yeah, the first thing I want to say to this is, before I get into how you manage it, I guess nowadays the kind of expectation from consumers, the kind of issues we have to face, where you need to manage what you do for the health of the consumer, for the health of the planet, and for the health of the business. Those are more and more complex questions to answer, and less companies will be able to answer them alone, right? So my view is that more and more we will see what I call ecosystem innovation. So when you bring together a set of partners that deliver to the consumer a holistic solution to what is trying to get. And I guess it makes the future R&D, in my mind, a coalition R&D. Right? So I think that's the future of the function, and the future of innovation will be coalition innovation. So how you bring together these different partners. And the complexity resides in basically you are connecting. So finding startups, partners, people that are interested in working with you, that's really not difficult, especially when you're a big group. The complexity is to manage the interface between what is a very complex internal world, essentially, and a very complex outside world. And if you connect it with no interfaces, it becomes chaos very quickly. So one of the things I have seen work, and I don't profess to be an expert on all of this, I think there's a lot of trial and error to be done still, but is to try and organize things around platforms. So you have somebody or a small team in the organization who is dedicated to overseeing a problem that you're trying to solve, for example, or type of, for example, how can we do sugar reduction? And that person oversees both the internal and external activities. So you have, and makes the connection between the two worlds. So you have somebody articulating and following a technology platform, if you want, or a consumer platform, if it's a specific need you want to go after. That has proven to work well to manage the complexity of interfaces.
I totally agree with you, Christophe. And I'm coming from the organizational angle, and it's really a challenge to define and implement or develop and implement organizational levers in order to manage this complexity. And I think what you just described is the kind of opportunity or challenge-driven approach to set up teams and to set up responsibilities to look at this, from the issue topic, and that's one approach. But managing this complexity is actually for our organization quite challenging.
Maybe to make it clear, it would be useful for the audience. It could be useful to take an example. I remember when we started the project with Christophe, he had taken an example, and I speak under your control, Christophe. That in many industries there is a servicization of the economy, where instead of selling your product, you sell the associated service or the function. So, for example, if Danone, instead of selling water bottles, was going to sell hydration service, obviously there is part of this service that Danone would be very comfortable with, because we are speaking about water. But there is another part, for example, the on-demand delivery, where it would be more difficult. So the idea behind this ecosystem innovation is really about that. How do you join forces between industries to be able to deliver the full experience and rather than the product? I don't know if you want to complete this example, Christophe, or if I oversimplified something that you said at some point.
No, it's a great example, and you would have the same around nutrition and health. If you're a consumer and you really want to take care of your health based on what you eat, honestly, it's quite complicated. Either you are a nutritionist yourself, or like me and Danone, you have access to many of them. But for the rest, it's very complicated. But nowadays, with artificial intelligence and data analytics, you could think actually the capabilities exist, they haven't been put together. You could have systems that basically measure what you eat, measure some of your bioparameters, and based on that recommend meal plan or activities and help you track your health basically. And that can even be looked into a delivery system which provides you with the right product. So that is what that we call with Albert, this kind of system which basically helps the consumer manage a bigger problem than the product that is included there.
Thank you. And I'm afraid we're running out of time, so we may have time for one last question that was raised here in the chat. And is how can you demonstrate to the business that these research and development efforts are actually creating value for shareholders? Christophe, you want to?
That's the topic we get. That's essentially a CFO topic mostly. Look, I guess, there are basically two activities in R&D, right? One which is very easy which is the short and long-term discussion we had earlier, right? Measuring the impact of R&D short-term is fairly simple. At the end of the day, it's about project delivery. It's about the impact of these projects on sales, this kind of thing. So that's easy to measure. It's good to measure. it doesn't tell you much about how well you're going to be doing 2, 3, or 4 years down the line, right? So it's only partly helpful. The piece that is much harder to measure, but is essential, is the long-term piece and the innovation. And I'm not a big fan of discussing return on investment on that kind of activity, because it's like discussing return on investment on your life insurance, right? Or the medical insurance. You take it so you have an option, and that's the role of long-term innovation, is to provide options for the time where the market changes, where there is disruption. And we know we are in a disruption economy nowadays. So there are two very different activities. And I think we should, one can be measured and should be measured and look at the return on investment. And the other one should be looked at in terms of, is it providing the options or enough options or fast enough options in case scenario 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 that we've seen in the future of food happen. And it's an important piece of the work that you need to do after a study like the one we did with Albert. Because when you get the results from Albert, it's very exciting. There's lots of new stuff, and it's a little bit scary because there's lots of new stuff. So you wonder, oh my God, how am I going to manage all of that? And in fact, you need to start looking at, how do I provide the right options for the business? Not covering everything, but at least, I know where my blind spots are, and I know where I need to invest sometimes fairly heavily because I really want to make it a differentiation point for me, or I just keep an eye on things because, okay, that technology may not evolve the way we thought. So you have to have a balance of, different topics with varied level of investment, and then you adjust these levels of investment as you go. And measuring that from an R&D perspective is more around, are you making hypotheses and are you crossing them off fast enough? Are you providing enough options? That's really the measure and the benefit to shareholders at the end of the day.
Thank you, Christophe. Very insightful. Any quick reactions to that?
One very swift one, which is, I think to enable that, you need a different appetite towards risk. So of these options, many of them are going to fail. And in a way, a failure can be seen as a success. But that is not necessarily what's seen the case within kind of core R&D. So, it's almost sort of, congratulating the team that's involved in it for having disproven a hypothesis, rather than criticizing them for not having created the next, $1 billion product.
Yeah. And it's not the typical reaction a CFO shows, yeah.
No.
So I'm afraid that's all the time we had for this session. First of all, I'd like to thank the panelists for the insightful discussion. Thank you all for sharing your views on these quite interesting topics about the future of the food industry. I would also like to thank the participants that were listening here. I hope this was useful and insightful for you and the companies you represent as well. We'll be happy to address any follow-up questions. I think we'll be sharing contact information, and you can, if you want to connect with any of our panelists, please let us know. We'll be happy to continue the dialogue and the discussion on these topics. And stay tuned, because this is just the first of a series of sessions and webinars that Arthur DeLittle and our company Presans are doing on future trends. So we'll be inviting you to more of similar sessions like this, and hope you enjoy. Stay safe, and hope to see you soon again. Thank you.